you so much, Dr. Abdaal, for coming today. We all really appreciate it. Our first question we're starting with today is from Adi Balur from Pennsylvania. And his question is, what do you love most about the NHS? And how do you think the NHS has handled the COVID-19 pandemic?
Okay, so that's a good question. I'll answer the second bit of that first. So the NHS, like the National Health Service, is like a huge organization. It's the UK's single biggest employer. And so it's really hard to say how has the NHS handled the pandemic because the response to the pandemic is quite hospital dependent. It would be like saying, how has the US government handled the pandemic? It's like some places have done it all right, some places haven't done it so well. It kind of depends on loads of different factors. So I think overall we've done a reasonable job. I think in the early days the numbers weren't looking good, but now as lockdown is starting to ease up in some parts of the UK, things seem generally reasonable. I've been working for the last year in a fairly small hospital in a town in the middle of nowhere. If any of you guys are fans of Ed Sheeran, it's the county where he's from. And so it's like, it's like a huge county full of like farms and farmers and stuff, but there's like a tiny little hospital in a tiny town. And so I haven't really seen much of the effects of COVID myself, especially because I was an OBGYN, as you would call it. But overall, no, I think our response has been fairly reasonable. Perhaps my friends working at bigger hospitals in London who were more overrun by it would say differently. I think the thing that I love most about the NHS, and this is just like absolutely mind-boggling how it's all just completely free. It's like, I remember when I was on my cardiothoracics placement, being like vividly aware of this. It was like some specialist tertiary cardiology center. They were doing a TAVI, which is a transcatheter aortic valve implantation, which is like a huge, like really high tech sort of interventional radiology type thing operation that like sort of 20 different people are involved with. And yeah, the patient was some dude in his 70s who had aortic stenosis, and he just had one of these operations, which took like this team of 20 experts like a whole day to do. And just like the fact that it probably cost tens of thousands of pounds just was not even on anyone's radar. It's just not even a thing to even think about cost. And that always kind of surprises me anytime I read about like the American system. It's just how much of it how much you even have to think about cost, whereas in the NHS we just don't think about it at all. So that's probably the thing I love most about it. I think it's got a nice logo as well, so that's another plus.
Thank you for that answer. So the next question is from Kavina Wang, who's from Virginia. And she says, Hi, Dr. Abdal. I'm a huge fan of your channel and frequently binge watch it without any guilt because I somehow convince myself each time that it's productive. I'm very interested in both medicine and entrepreneurship and business, so you're a huge inspiration of mine. And I was wondering how you got into both fields and also how to manage pursuing both. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Kavina. The way I got into them was because I discovered Tim Ferriss's amazing book, The 4-Hour Workweek, just before my first year of med school. So I was about 17 or 18 when I first discovered that. And that really turned me on to this idea of passive income. And he kind of sold the dream of, what if you could get to a point where you make money from the internet and from your side businesses, and then you don't need to work. And that always resonated with me going into medicine because for the last 8 years, I've been asking every doctor that I hang out with the question that if you won the lottery, would you still want to do medicine full time? And about half of them say, no, I would leave completely. The other half say, I would still do medicine because it's fun, but I would do it part time. And so that kind of made me realize fairly early on that I don't want to take the risk. That I think when we're young and applying to med school and stuff, we have this kind of idealistic view towards medicine. We think, this is the career that's going to be for me. This is the one thing that's going to bring me, the ultimate satisfaction, the ultimate everything in life. And yet, if you speak to doctors, you'll find that most of them are not 100% satisfied with their jobs. And so that was kind of my into the whole kind of entrepreneurship world. Like, I've always been interested in the idea of making money online. When I was in secondary school or high school or middle school, as you call it in the US, me and my friends, we would start lots of businesses and they would always fail. And, it was just like a cool thing because I was a bit of a nerd. But then it was really sort of after discovering the 4-Hour Workweek and the fact that all this was possible that I really started to focus on the entrepreneurial side of things. And it kind of just makes med school a bit more fun. Like med school in the UK is probably a little bit more chill than med school in the US is. Our exams are easier. I'm dabbling with USMLE prep at the moment, and I can't believe how much stuff you guys have to learn. It's insane. Our exams are a bit easier. It's also less of the impression I get of the US is it's quite like a cutthroat competitive vibe, whereby you have to kind of really sort of gun for competitive positions. It's a lot more chill in the UK, and so there is plenty of time on the side to pursue other interests. So I had friends who were playing kind of for like rugby at like a really high level, doing the sports stuff, music stuff. I chose personally to do the entrepreneurship, tech, business type thing because that was what I was interested in. So that's sort of how I got into it. And then pursuing both, like again, in the UK, it's chill because you got loads of time. And so it's just a case of kind of effectively studying using effective study techniques, because that's how you free up your spare time to do more interesting things. And then just exploring stuff that's interesting in the spare time. And I find that kind of doing stuff with friends is always like a fun way to go about it, because it's all well and good kind of starting up your own business or whatever. But if you're doing it with friends, it also doubles as a social activity. And so you get all of these different kind of points off of this one thing that you're doing. So it's pretty good.
The next question is from Aparna Sivaraman from Missouri. And her question is, to you, what is the importance of a balanced lifestyle, and how do you find a way to avoid burnout?
That's an interesting question. Like, how do you how do you avoid burnout? I think there's been very few occasions in my life where I've experienced much burnout. And I think it's because, like, I like to think that I have a pretty good radar for what the priorities are. So, for example, physical health, always priority number one. Mental health, well-being, happiness, always priority number two. Relationships, priority number three. Making some amount of money, priority number four. And studying is always the lowest on the priority list. The way that I think of it is like, if you guys ever played like video games like World of Warcraft, I was big into that back in the day. It's like, let's say you're a paladin or a warrior or something, and you have like these 8 different moves that you can do. And one of them is like your default, basic, I'm going to slash you with my axe. But all the others are like fancy ass moves, like whirlwind or blade storm or whatever. But all those moves have like a cooldown timer on them. Like you can't use it more than once every 30 seconds or whatever. And so you would work through your rotation. And then when you have nothing better to do, at that point, you would use your basic attack and hit something with a stick. And so the basic attack of medical school, in my mind, is studying. Everything else takes priority over that. And so when you have that kind of view of getting through med school, it becomes actually very easy to do all these different things, provided you can do your basic attack with enough frequency to not fail the exams. And like I said, in the UK, it's probably a bit easier than in the US. So yeah, it was just a case of figuring out the priorities. And I kind of made a point to myself that even though I was doing lots of stuff on the side, I never want to get to a point where I have to turn down a social event because I'm doing something on the business or because I'm studying. And so social events were to me like, this is what university is about. I actually don't care about the studies. I care about getting through the exams. But beyond that, there is so little marginal utility in getting extra exam results and getting more percentage higher on exams that, you can kind of play the game a bit more intelligently. I think if every year I'd been thinking kind of tunnel vision, I have to aim for the highest mark I possibly can, then things would have been harder because I would have been kind of competing against other people on the exam front, and I would have also been trying to do the stuff on the side. And I'm just a bit mediocre in everything I do, so that's how you avoid burnout. If you do lots of things to like a fairly mediocre standard, life is fun, and you also avoid burnout. But if you try and excel in different fields, then it's a bit harder. So that's kind of my cheating secret. Just don't do anything at a very high level.
Our next question is from Allison Lehman from Indiana, and she says, with many students now being faced with extended remote learning due to COVID-19, what would you recommend to maximize productivity and balance electronic and physical distractions?
Oh, man. I think it's actually quite a good time now because, I mean, apart from the fact that you don't get to hang out with friends, because, the whole point of university is hanging out with friends. But if you don't have that, then, like, to be honest, I didn't really go to many lectures when I was at university. It was mostly a self-taught thing. Equally, most of my friends, people look at a place like Cambridge University and you would think, oh, your lectures must be amazing and you must be taught by such world experts. But, they're all, like, the lectures are fairly boring and most people don't turn up. And, like, we end up self-teaching ourselves most of the medical curriculum anyway. And so now that remote learning is a thing, you basically can do that without even feeling guilty about it. And so the trick would be to really think about, well, what's the game you're playing and what specific thing are you optimizing for? If you're trying to get a high step 1 score, or I don't know, whatever you guys do, then there are ways of doing that. And there's a fairly prescribed path that sort of tens of thousands of medical students before you will have taken. And so if you can just kind of do that prescribed path in an efficient fashion, then you end up having quite a bit of spare time left to do other things. But I guess in terms of balancing electronic and physical distractions, like electronic distractions, really it's just a case of putting your phone in another room. Some people find, you've got those boxes these days where have like a lid on top of it, and you put your phone in the box, and the lid is like a timer lock that it locks your phone in that box for like half an hour. If you like really can't handle distraction, then getting those boxes really helps. I always find, take my phone, chuck it onto the sofa, and I've forgotten about it. I've put it on Do Not Disturb. Chances are there's not going to be a life or death emergency. And in terms of physical distractions, I think I actually welcome physical distractions. Like when I was studying, I would always sort of work with my university door open so anyone could come and visit. Because again, it's thinking back to what is the point of all this ultimately. Like I'm at university. The main objective of university is to build relationships and to enjoy life. The secondary purpose of university is to get through the exams. And so I'd much rather take a 10% productivity hit if it means a friend feels comfortable enough to come over to my room to have a chat, because those are the relationships that you kind of think about, and you never remember that, oh, damn, I really wish on the 18th of May, 2012, I'd studied an extra hour, because that doesn't make any difference at all. But you will be glad of the fact that you made more time for your friends. So yeah, welcome the social distractions and get rid of the stupid electronic distractions would be my advice.
Thank you so much for that awesome answer, Dr. Abdaal. So the next one is from Charlotte Cunningham from Virginia. And her question is, how much time do you reserve for setting up an effective studying system? And how do you check that your system works before taking an actual exam?
Okay, interesting question, Charlotte. I would take absolutely no time to set up an effective studying system. I think the only thing you need to do is read a book called Make It Stick. And if you want, you can watch one or two of my videos on how to study for exams, which basically just, I've ripped off stuff from that book and I'm presenting it on the internet. So if you can read a book, then you're saving yourself a lot of time. But basically, there's only two things that you need to study for exams, and that's active recall, i.e. testing yourself, and spaced repetition, which is spreading your testing of yourself through spaced intervals over time. And there's loads of stuff on YouTube these days on how to do those things. I think it's actually probably, it tends to be like, at least from my perspective, it tends to be an exercise in procrastination to set up an effective studying system. Because at least to me and my friends, what that used to look like is we'd sit down and be like, right, I need to make a top-down approach. I'm going to plan everything right now, and then I'll start studying. And then the planning thing just takes so long, and like you never end up following the plan that you set out to do anyway. And so I would just kind of start, like, the main thing is kind of, you pick a subject, you firstly scope the subject, like figure out what it, like essentially make a list of all of the different topics within that subject, and then start working on your weakest one and just plow through it. Make sure you understand the content by using stuff like the Feynman technique, which basically involves being able to explain it to a friend or explain it to a 5-year-old. Once you can do that, you find some questions and you do some practice questions, and then you make like a timetable just to make sure that you're doing the spaced repetition thing. That doesn't take a lot of effort to set up. It takes 5 minutes to set up like a timetable. And so that would be what I would suggest. I'd suggest taking much longer than that means you're probably, at least if you're anything like me, you're probably more going into the playing the game of setting up a perfect system rather than actually setting up a perfect system. And how do you check that your system works before taking an exam? I mean, the whole thing about effective studying is you want to be testing yourself every single day. If you're unhappy with your grades, the authors of the book Make It Stick say, if you're unhappy with your grades, then chances are you're just not testing yourself enough. And so taking the exam should absolutely not be the first time you've ever tested your knowledge, because the whole like process of studying for an exam involves testing yourself every single day. And so I wouldn't really worry that the system works before taking an exam, because I would know that I'm getting these questions right. I'm doing the past papers. I'm doing my question bank, whatever the method is. And so the exam is just a repetition of what I've already done before.
So our next question is from Shruti Gotham from Missouri. And she says, since the focus of your YouTube channel is on productivity and organization, where or from whom did you start learning these skills?
It's one of those weird ones where you kind of fake it till you make it, right? Like the focus at the start was never on productivity or organization. The focus at the start was how to get into med school, and then vlogs of life as a med student, and then like, a video about how to study effectively for your exams. And so the video, the videos that I made about studying effectively, like productivity in that specific sphere, I just ripped off of books like Make It Stick, and I found like a good review paper from Professor Dunlosky 2013 on the internet, and I ripped off of that. So I learned those skills from that review paper and that book. And then when you start doing this kind of stuff and making stuff on YouTube while you're a medical student, people just automatically assume you're some kind of productivity guru. And then you start being like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm a productivity guru. And then you think, like, how can I share the process of the things that I'm already doing? Like, I don't think I'm particularly productive, but people on the internet seem to. And so when I make a video just showing the behind the scenes of like essentially documenting what I'm doing anyway, people seem to resonate with that. And so, yeah, it's one of those things that anyone who becomes like a content creator, you sort of find yourself in a way, like by default ending up in the niche that you ended up in. Often it's not that premeditated. Like I never planned to be a productivity YouTuber. So yeah, I just kind of figure stuff out, watch YouTube videos. I mean, to be honest, I read loads of productivity books. I listen to a ton of business podcasts. You know, I listen to 2 audiobooks a week at like 3x speed. I listen to sort of 10 podcasts a week at 3x speed. You know, when you do enough of that stuff, you start getting very familiar with the productivity literature, and then you can start sort of making your own spin-offs off of that. So I guess that would be how I learn stuff these days.
Our next question is from Ria Melegam from Pennsylvania. And her question is, how can students be sure a career in medicine is right for them? And in your opinion, what is the hardest part of medical school?
Interesting. So in the UK, the hardest part of medical school is actually getting into med school. Med school itself, like again, at least in the UK, it's not that hard because you just have to understand a finite number of concepts, and then you have to memorize a fire hose of information. And we know that there are effective techniques to memorize the fire hose of information, like to recall spaced repetition. So it's not that hard once you get in. I think, honestly, probably the hardest part of med school is just the fact that it's very much overhyped. At least in the UK, I feel like this is probably true in the US. There is a perception amongst medical students that medicine is like the single hardest thing you could ever be doing in your life. And if you're a medical student, then you're really hard done by because you have to study all the time and you have to sacrifice all these bits and so on. And I really bought into that mentality when I was in my first year. And I think that's a big part of why I found it hard. But then as soon as I kind of embraced the mentality of actually, I'm just understanding a few bits and then memorizing a load of stuff, it became a lot easier. So I think that's probably the thing. And then Ria's question was, how can students be sure a career in medicine is right for them? You can't really. Like, you really have no idea what being a doctor is like until you're actually a doctor. There are so many people I know who went through medical school and only once they were actual doctors did they realize maybe this isn't for me. But then, like, there are so many different career paths in medicine. Like, the specialties are so varied. If you realize you hate people, you can just become a radiologist or a pathologist or a microbiologist. Like, you don't need to do the people thing. If you realize you love people, then you can start doing it. Then you can do a more people specialty. If you realize you just want to be in theater all day, then you become a surgeon. There are so many different paths. And even if you don't want to be a doctor directly, having a medical degree means you've unlocked the pharmaceutical industry, you've unlocked research, you've unlocked biotech. And so, yeah, it's like a career in medicine is so broad. Like, you can never be sure a career in medicine is right for you. But chances are you can find the career in medicine that will work for you.
So this is our last question, and it's actually submitted by the conference board. And the question is, many of your ventures and studying techniques you've developed and mastered require you to be creative. How do you recommend fostering and developing a sense of creativity?
Oh, this is a good question. I think there is no such thing as creativity. I am not a creative person in the slightest. The only thing that I do is I copy other people and I remix other people's stuff and sort of present it as my own. But if you read books from artists, there's a dude called Austin Kleon who writes amazing books about this concept of creativity. His first book is called Steal Like an Artist. And his whole spiel is that, look, you know, creativity is just combining things that you've been inspired by from different sources. There's a guy on the internet called Derek Sivers as well, who has a book called Anything You Want, which is one of the books that changed my life. He used to be a professional musician, and he also talks about creativity, and he's written books about it. And he says creativity is just remixing. It is taking, you know, there was that song I heard in the 90s from India. I'm going to take the beat from that song, and I'm going to take the chord structure of an Ed Sheeran song, and I'm going to add it to a freaking, I don't know, Drake song, and I'm going to add these things together. And I know where all the inspirations are from this song, but other people won't, and therefore they will think I'm a creative person because I've put 2 and 2 together. And so I don't like the word creativity, because what really held me back, well, I wouldn't say held me back, what almost stopped me from starting the online content thing was that I thought I wasn't creative because I didn't have any original ideas or any original insights. But one quote that I always come back to is that there is no such thing as a unique message. There are only unique messengers. And there are so many people I speak to now who are thinking of starting a YouTube channel or an Instagram page or a podcast, but you're like, yeah, well, I don't have anything unique to add. Like, everything has been done. And yeah, of course, everything has been done, but that doesn't mean you don't have anything unique to add. The fact that you are doing the thing means it's inherently unique and inherently kind of creative in a sense. And so I I'm not a creative person at all. I just think I do a reasonable job of ripping off other people's ideas and kind of remixing them into something else. And that's all creativity really is. And so if the question is, how do you recommend fostering and developing a stronger sense of creativity? Like, read more stuff, watch more stuff, take notes on it. That's one thing I wish I did more often. Like, this is like my biggest regret in life, is that I didn't take more notes on books that I'd read or podcasts that I'd listened to from like the age of 15 onwards. Like, if I'd done that, I'd have been sitting on like an incredible like Evernote folder full of like my own thoughts and reflections and all the stuff that I've read over the last 11 years. That is how you manufacture creativity. You consume stuff, you write notes and sort of distill the stuff that you learn from the things, and then you combine them together to make your own stuff. And that's all creativity really is.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdaal. Very insightful and interesting answers and advice. With that, we'll be concluding the question and answer session. On behalf of our conference board and all these students in our program, thank you so much for being a part of our conference and for all you do. You're an amazing role model, and we wish you all the best.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.